Welcome, everyone. We're going to start our 5 o'clock study session of the City Council. City Clerk, confirmation of a quorum. I waited till you walked over there. Yes.
Gilmore confirming quorum.
Thank you. So tonight's study session is the Silicon Valley Power update. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Good evening to members of the public. This study session has been quite some time in the making. We tried to present this before the budget and then during the budget, and just couldn't find time to do that. And here we are today. I'm glad, and I thank you for taking the time to hear about it. The purpose today is to talk about our electric utility, which is also known as Silicon Valley Power. And it's as we all know, but members of the public may or may not, it's a large company. It's, a $350 million company, and with varied portfolio, and, we use wind power, gas power, hydropower. And then it's been led by Director John Rockma very ably and very efficiently. And we are leaders in renewable energy, and we are trending wherever the power industry is taking us. So today's presentation is just to give a glimpse of what this utility is all about. Our portfolio, and also how we are financed and how the rate structures work, and also what the trends are for the future. And then, we can take input from the public, and we'll take your advice and move forward to the next level. So with that, I would like to invite Director John Rockma.
Thank you. Good evening. Is your microphone on, John? Okay. We want to make sure we hear you.
There you go.
No? We need to help the Director of Electric Utility with the electronics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make sure there's some
Good.
electricity there.
Make sure there's electricity there. Thanks, Teresa.
Okay,
Oh,
there
very
we go.
good.
Now,
Yes,
now we're
thank
working here. Well, thank you very much. The first thing I like to do is just introduce some of the staff that are here. These are the people that really run the utility and do the work. And we got our two assistant directors, Ann Hatcher and Kevin Kolnowski here, and does our resources and customer service side. And then Kevin is the one who is all the engineering and operations and maintenance and the wires and all that. And then we have Larry Owens, who's our senior division manager, who handles our customer service and our communications and so on. All very important to the utility. So the first thing I like to do is just, we will just put out the good news first. There is no rate increase in January of 2018. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is, but want to get that out front. We'll touch a little bit on the background.
That's a good thing to start with.
Yeah, I'll probably have it about 5 times in here. No, we'll give a little bit of background on Silicon Valley Power. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the world around us, and then some of the responses and initiatives that we're doing. As you know, Silicon Valley Power is your locally owned municipal utility. We were established in 1896. You set our budgets and our rates for the utility. We're not regulated by the PUC. Sometimes I'm not sure about that. But we do have 54,000 customers, and this year's budget, if you combine the capital and the operating, we're about almost $450 million. Now, out of that, about $30 million gets transferred to the general fund. Most of that is with the contribution in lieu of taxes, and the rest of it is for services that we actually pay the general fund for. We got a peak of about 568 megawatts and sell about 3,500 gigawatt hours a year. That's just to give you an example of that energy. It's probably 2/3 of the energy that San Jose uses. In Santa Clara. So we have a lot of customers that are very energy intensive, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. We have 26 substations, 7 generation plants that the city owns, 500 miles plus of distribution lines. We got a 145-mile fiber optic backbone, 19,000 poles, and 5,700 other devices out there. So just a lot of stuff to keep track of, maintain, and operate out there. So what do? We're a full-service integrated utility, which means that we generate electricity, we bring it to Santa Clara, and we distribute it to our customers. We also have a full set of energy efficiency programs, solar programs, green power programs. But there's other services that we provide also. Street lighting, that's something that the utility provides, generally a general fund function. We also provide 24-hour dispatch that is non-public safety. So if it's a street issue or a water issue or whatever they call our control center, and we dispatch the appropriate crews for it. Traffic signal maintenance, we handle that. We also provide the SVP Meter Connect Wi-Fi system, and of course our dark fiber leasing. Talk a little bit more about the dark fiber. Again, we got the backbone originally put in to connect our substations and our own internal communications. But we do have a extensive leasing program. We bring in about $3 million a year through that leasing program. And one thing I'd just like to point out is one of the more fun projects, and we're expanding this system all the time, was we partnered with the school district to actually connect all of the schools. So every school in the Santa Clara Unified School District, even the ones in San Jose and Cupertino, are connected to this fiber optic system. And so we partnered with them. They had some bond money. They had one to lower their operating costs, and it was a good win-win, a great program for both of us. This slide, I'm not going to go through every word on this slide, obviously, but this just shows you some of the outreach that we do on a regular basis. We got about $500 million a year that goes to communications and outreach. And we not only have publications going out on our programs and trying to promote programs and so on, but we also do a lot of customer surveys and so on to try to get information back. And on alternative years, we survey our commercial customers, and then the next year we do our residential customers. And we're always looking for feedback of what are they looking for, and how are we doing in that program. Now, just some of the things that are necessary to keep an operation going. I always want to start with safety and compliance. Health and safety of our employees and our customers and citizens is extremely important. We're always providing training, and of course there's a lot of reporting that goes along there. With that, environmental compliance is another major area for us. We have air permits for our generation, and there's water permits and hazardous materials that we use in the utility. Again, all takes training, monitoring, and reporting on these things. And then there's a whole new area that started in 2008, and that is the National Electric Reliability Council has mandatory federal reliability standards. And since we are a full service utility, we have generation, we have transmission lines, we have our distribution system. Unlike a lot of municipal utilities, we're actually subject to hundreds of these regulations and standards that we have to demonstrate that we're in compliance with. And this has become a major effort in a utility over the last 8 or 9 years here. Of course, operations and maintenance, we do have a 24-hour control center that continuously monitors the system. We have our transmission and distribution line group that takes care of the lines. This picture, it's not super clear on the side there, but this is actually one of our new apprentices who's only been working here a few weeks. We're kind of putting him through a boot camp and trying to get him comfortable on the pole there. So you see him hanging straight out from the pole and with both hands above his head. That's because they got to get up there. They have to be able to work on top of the poles and be able to use both hands and handle tools and stuff. So this is just one of the drills to get him comfortable, with doing that. Usually they would not work in that position, but So we also have our substation and municipal services group. And they take care of our substations, and on the municipal services side, they're the ones that do the traffic signals, support the water department and pump stations and other departments in electrical needs. We have our generation and, of course, metering facilities. Then we have our engineering department. In all of those programs I talked about so far, we have engineering that goes along with that. And they do system studies, modeling, planning, design, construction management. And then they keep all the records. You know, we talked about having, 25,000 devices out there. We got to keep track of all those and what's out there, where it is, what it's doing, and so on. So there's a lot of mapping and records that goes along with that. We also have resource procurement, and delivery. We have to do integrated resource planning, look at all the resources coming in, including energy efficiency and so on, trying to match and make sure we have enough energy coming in to meet our customers' needs. It takes a lot of contracts, so they initiate contracts and administer those contracts. Then we have another 24/7 operation in that our power scheduling and trading operation, where 24 hours a day, there's somebody at that desk making sure that we have each 5-minute period that we have enough energy coming in that matches the load. And they're constantly, making and adjusting and scheduling that power and getting it into the city. A lot of regulatory reporting associated with this, a lot of new legislation and reporting on renewables and energy uses and fuel types, and then since we are doing these transactions on a 5-minute basis, buying and selling electricity, at the end of the month you got to settle all that up and pay the bills. And sometimes they're paying us, sometimes we're paying them, we're paying the ISO. There's 75 different charge types with the ISO that the California Independent System Operator that runs the transmission system. And all of that has to be settled up for all of those periods. And we have a team that goes through that. Now, a lot of this is, we try to automate as much as we can. We have another group that's talking about using communications and control and information systems. You've heard a lot about cybersecurity recently and critical infrastructure protection with the Ukraine incidents and shutting down the power. A lot of that happened the first time just before a few months before the Super Bowl. Homeland Security was very active with us to making sure that nothing like that was going to happen, again, here. So it's a major area for us. We do have supervisory control and data acquisition systems that are, or SCADA system, continuously monitoring the system and brings us in alarms if there's issues. Then there's operational and control, and everything is becoming, computerized, computer-driven, data-driven as we move forward, and that including our protection systems. And when I talk about protection systems, I'm talking about, say, if a balloon's getting a transmission line, we can detect that and shut the power off in less than 1/10 of a second, and that means that both sides of those transmission lines have to be talking together continuously so that if something like that happens, one's saying this much power is coming in this way and the other one's, that same amount's going out this way. If those two don't equal each other, something's wrong in the middle, shut it down. And we can do that in, like I said, 1/10 of a second. So it's a lot of information technology in this, since we have what we call our system support group that supports a lot of that technology. We operate our own networks and servers and applications, have redundant data centers, and with in that function. Obviously, customer service is one that you probably hear as much about, or more with, and that's Larry Owen's group here. And we have our key customer representatives. All of our largest customers have a dedicated key customer rep. Not one per customer, but they have a key customer rep that they can communicate with 24 hours a day. A lot of times our goal is that if we have an outage affecting one of those customers, we try to communicate with them first. We have a paging system now, a lot of times that not paging, but a texting system that we can get information to them as it occurs. so on. We have our public benefits programs, which are the energy efficiency, low-income solar and green power programs that we run through this group. Then we got our customer outreach and communications is also run by Larry's group, and then fiber optic leasing program. They also handle all the leases and the customers and so on there. And then we got the administration. All of this takes a fair amount of administration. On contract management, we probably have 350 to 400 active contracts going at any one time in the utility. So managing those, make sure everything's up to date. We're constantly bringing contracts for you guys to approve, for the council approval, but it just takes a lot to run the utility. And then, of course, we got to pay all the bills and so on there too. So let's talk a little bit about the makeup of our customers and the utility. 85% of our customers are residential, and they use about 6.5% of the energy in the utility. 3% of our customers are industrial, and they use over 90% of the energy that we supply. And that sets us aside. A lot of times, many utilities, residential, commercial, and industrial, are much more balanced between the three categories. So this is really kind of distinguishes us. Now, one of the questions is, we've had a lot of load growth in the last couple of years. In fiscal year 2016, we grew about 7.7%. And in this current fiscal year, it's going to be about 3.6%. When you compare to most utilities in California, they're actually seeing load decreases. And we're seeing a little bit of load decrease in our residential sector, energy conservation, newer appliances, all kinds of things that are pushing that, solar, pushing that. And so we're seeing those same trends. But we have a lot of these larger customers coming in, and that's driving our load. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, the way we're set up in our fees, they pay their way as they come in. We don't, our other customers are not investing on improvements to the system for them. They have to pay through their fees, pay their way there for the upfront capital investments. And then our rate structures are set so that our average rates, because we have fixed costs and operating costs, they pay more for their energy than is the variable incremental cost of serving them. So we have a contribution to our fixed costs. So that actually helps all the rest of the customers by spreading those fixed costs over more kilowatt hour sales. So generally, this has been a very positive thing for us and has really helped us. One of the drivers of why there's not a rate increase coming, along with the great hydro season we had, which I'll talk about a little bit too. Now, there are upper limits to this growth. And the system, as we go up in the system, our capability of bringing the energy in and including impacts on PG&E and others, there are upper limits, and we need to make sure that we're paying attention to those as the load grows and expands. And I'll talk about that just a little bit later too. I just threw this up because this shows kind of national averages in energy costs. You see the national, a lot of the nation in the center there is between 5 and 10 cents a kilowatt hour. California is typically closer to 15 to 20 cents a kilowatt hour. I don't know, PG&E has got to be 22 or more there. We're at about 11, so we're a little bit more than you see in the rest of the country there, but we're on the lowest on California, the lower end. So, but that also means that it's low for California, but our customers can also move. They can relocate their operations and so on. So it's always good to keep this in mind. So what is the value to the community? And I show this graph here, and it shows us as the lowest average system rates, of the utilities. Here, well, what does that mean? And again, in addition to the $30 million to the general fund and some of those direct street lighting and some of those other direct benefits. This means that compared to the cities that are served by PG&E, there's probably $100 to $150 million that stays in our customers' pockets because of our rates in Santa Clara. And that's a benefit to, the customers of Santa Clara. So where does this energy come from? And we have a very diverse portfolio, and it's diverse in fuel type, it's diverse in location, and it's diverse in ownership. And I think that diversity spreads risk, gives us flexibility, and actually is a very important part of kind of our strategies going forward. You can see we have plants and so on throughout California. Some of them are hydroelectric, geothermal, solar, wind, gas-fired, landfill gas, just a broad range of fuel types. They go as high as Washington State with wind projects, and we have, until the end of the year, a piece of coal-fired plant in New Mexico, and we'll be divesting ourselves of that at the end of this year. This is just another representation, of that. On the right, left-hand side, you see the ownership types. Some of it's through JPAs, such as the MSR Public Power Agency. We own with Modesto and Redding. The Northern California Power Agency plants there. We're city-owned. We also buy energy from the Western Area Power Administration. And then the other side is just the various fuel types. What is the source of the energy? And that's 2016. And 2017, you'll see a lot more hydro in that and less natural gas in those charts. So, this is interesting. This slide didn't work on this. This slide, the black line that stair steps up is the requirements for renewable resources for utilities in California. And right now it's about 25%, stepping up to 30%, and steps up to all the way to 50% over time. The black line on your handout there is shows where we are currently. And you'll see that we're at 39, 40%, 41%. There, and we're constantly looking for renewable resources and stepping up. We brought a solar project to you last week or last meeting, for approval. And since we're ahead of the curves, here, it allows us to be pickier on the projects that we choose and that we bring forward, the ones that are most beneficial. Now, the yellow line is current legislation, SB 100 there. And you'll see it steps up a lot faster, and it gets to 60% by 2030, and then actually shoots to an aspirational goal of 100% renewables by 2050. Now, that's not a firm target, but that's a goal. And that legislation is currently going through the legislature on that. And again, you see we're well positioned. We got to keep working at it, bringing on more renewables, but where we are now, the other thing we do, and this is by council policy, is when we're above the curve like this, we actually sell renewable energy credits for the difference between the requirement and where we are. And we use those revenues to help subsidize bringing on additional renewable resources or paying down. Sometimes the cost is kind of high up front, bringing down those prices. So we actually reinvest that into the renewables. Now, the other side of this too is there's greenhouse gases. And one of the interesting issues we end up is they try to regulate all kinds of little pieces getting to the same goal. One is they set renewable goals. Another one is they cap the greenhouse gas emissions and so on. Now, in this program, it's called Cap and Trade. They give us a certain number of allowances out there, and over time, they'll reduce the number of allowances available, and that's the cap, and that'll drive renewable or greenhouse gases down by reducing that cap. But what they also do is hold quarterly auctions, and the red line there at the top is the allocation of allowances we have that the city holds. The stacked bars are our needs for those allowances. We're able to take the difference between those and participate in the auctions and again produce revenue that allows us to reinvest in new renewables and so on going forward. And you can see going from 2017 to 2018, when the coal-fired plant gets, we divest ourselves of that, we drop tremendously. And that'll have a great value for us, with those allowances. Now, this is another one that's currently in front of the legislature right now. There were a number of different bills out there, and just over the weekend, and it just got published yesterday, was a compromise driven through the governor's office that extends this program from 2020 to 2030 and basically keeps it in the same form so that we'll have the allocations of allowances given to us. We'll still be able to trade those and put those into the market so people who can't reduce their emissions, they can buy allowances from those who can. And theoretically, that gets the most efficient process for driving down greenhouse gases. But just to give you an example, there was other legislation proposed out there that would not have given those allowances, allocated those allowances, and that would have cost our customers up to $400 million in reduced revenue and additional costs between 2020 and 2030. So we're very actively, and Councilmember O'Neill was participated in this, with the legislative process to try to get them to continue the program the way it now looks like it's going to be continued. So hopefully when they vote, looking at Thursday, that'll be a successful legislation. So where do our operating expenses go? We had this one in there before, but I just wanted to hit it really quickly. Most of our expenses go to resource and production costs. That's the biggest piece of it. About 10% goes to salary and benefits. And then we have interfund services and contribution in lieu as another big chunk there. But the biggest part is resource and production costs. And on the right-hand side of this, kind of the gray area on the left is our joint powers agencies. That includes NCPA, multiple projects there, MSR, Transmission Agency in Northern California, Tank. And it, again, shows you where those resource and production costs go. And it takes, we spend a fair amount of effort trying to manage those costs and keep those as low as we can. And then this is just, again, I don't know, some of these slides are not playing well here, but that large category there is our industrial revenue. About 84% of our revenue comes from our industrial customers. 6.1% comes from our residential customers. And then we have the various other sources of revenue coming in. So one thing I want to talk about a little bit is how we've used our reserves and costs and how we trade off use of reserves and rate increases. And I know this is a lot of stuff on this graph, but the black line is our operating costs over time. And the red line that dropped in 2005 to 2010 was our reserves. And we had a lot of impacts on us over time. Our Western Area Power Administration contracts changed and ended up costing us a lot more money there. We had natural gas prices ran up in 2000 and 2008. The wholesale market completely changed its format, which actually took away a lot of benefit from some of our assets there. And then we had a drought layered in on top of that in 2007, 8, and 9, there. And particularly because of the drought, we used a lot of our reserves to mitigate rate increases in there. And part of that is because normally droughts are cyclic, so you can use those reserves to get you through the drought. And then when it starts raining again, you can replenish those reserves. Well, we had one really good wet year in 2010-11. And then we hit the second drought. We went into an even longer drought. So, and at the same time, electric transmission rates went up, gas transportation rates went up for getting gas to our power plants. So we kind of stabilized our use of reserves, but again, we had to do some rate increases in there. So we did a lot of other things other than it's just not use of reserves and rate increases to respond to this. You know, we built the DVR power plant. We hedged gas prices. We built the phase shifting transformer. We actually divested some of our non-productive assets that weren't valued to us or as much value. We refinanced debt. We entered into a gas prepay contract, which basically gives us a 76-cent discount on every MMBTU gas, which runs about $3.50 an MMBTU. So a 76-cent discount is a pretty hefty discount for that gas price with that gas prepay. We did have load growth after coming out of the recession. We've been very active in legislative and regulatory area. So we've done a lot. It's not just relying on rate increases and the use of reserves. And with that, with this year, and we will be looking to transfer money from our operating cash funds to the reserve targets and actually bring us back up to that $120 million target. We're going to be able to do that this year, and plus contribute some to the pension liability funds there. So we're going to be we actually pretty good this year. So talking about that, how did we do? Well, we're still working. It's early in July. We're still looking at the final numbers here and so on. And one thing I do want to point out is SVP does have separate audited financials, from the city in addition to the city's audited financials. And those are available on the city's website on the finance page. They're also available on the SVP website, so you can look back historically, how the utilities performed on a financial basis. Now this year, our revenues exceeded the budget estimates. A lot of that is higher because of higher than estimated sales. It's a very positive thing. Our expenses are actually under budget. And even though we sold more energy and had to procure and produce more energy, because of the good hydro year and the great snowpacks and so on, there's a lot of hydroelectric available and prices, were down, so that kind of offset the additional sales. So our total budget, our total expenses are coming in under budget too, which is the reason why we're able to replenish our reserves this year. And again, I told you I'd say this more than once, but there will be no rate increase in 2018 because of this. These results there. And in addition to that, we're not really, our models, so we have pretty extensive models that we run out 10 years, and they're always better in the first few years than they are in the last few years, but we're not really forecasting a rate increase in the next couple of years, a few years here. So if we were looking at a big rate increase next year, we would have been talking about potentially still having a rate increase, this year, just so that we don't hit anybody or slam anybody. But we don't see that need over the next few years. Now, things change all the time.
Right.
So, markets could change, prices could change, and I could be in here next year at this time saying, we need a rate increase. But that's the way our models look now and the way things are going. That's my disclaimer here. So, yeah. So let's look at the changes in the business environment, that we have. So we got climate change. We've talked about a lot about that, legislative and regulatory initiatives in both the renewable portfolios, greenhouse gases. But technology is changing out there too. Solar prices, have come down, so people are moving towards solar. Some of our larger customers are talking about installing fuel cells, which provide energy, for them. Energy storage prices are coming down, and that actually changes the way the systems function. Being able to store energy is something that we never really able to do, before or do efficiently. It's still very costly, but those prices are coming down. And then the whole information technology and communications is changing. Data is becoming much bigger, a lot more availability of data out there, a lot more sensors and communications capabilities of being able to put. I went to a conference in Santa Clara, just a real walk through an exhibition hall at the Internet of Things conference at the convention center. And they had Samsung, had a little device about that big, smaller than this, that they showed how they had put it on a power pole, and then they ran a model car into it, and the power pole tipped, and it gave an alarm that power pole, tipped. Those are the types of technologies that are starting to occur, and it's not just in the utility. They're allow us to, measure temperature and other, components there, but it's also the end users. I mean, your refrigerator connecting to the internet now, there's all kinds of, and once you're connected to the internet, you now can control energy usage and so on. I can turn, the temperature up in my house, up with my phone. Those types of things it's all more and more becoming available. My wife might not like that, but I could. Then there's the whole, series of, with all this connectivity comes those cyber threats and physical security threats. There's the electric grid is very targeted, by people or talked about a lot. So there's a lot of discussion over on security here. The labor market, is changing. Our workforce is getting older, although we're being fairly successful in trying to draw in younger people. And that the cost of living in this area makes it tough, and as everybody sees here. So being able to attract and retain personnel is that market's changing. The retail market changes. Customer expectations are changing. They want cleaner, greener energy out there, and they always want lower prices and higher reliability, and they want choices. I mean, so these are just customer expectations, as options are out there. And then the wholesale markets, the things that the customers don't see, but we deal with, every day are changing too. One thing that you've heard about is community choice aggregation, and although it doesn't impact us directly, this is where, we got the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority, where you got all of Santa Clara County joining together, except for San Jose, which is creating their own. You got the Peninsula Clean Energy Authority, which is in San Mateo County. You got San Francisco. All of these organizations, PG&E will remain the distribution company, will maintain the wires and deliver the energy, but these organizations will now procure that energy in the market and sell it to the customers. And the customers can opt out if they want to continue to buy it from PG&E. But these community choice aggregators, in a few years, could be taking up to 80% of the investor-owned utilities, such as PG&E's load. So that really changes the dynamics of the markets, and it puts a lot more competition in there for some of the types of resources. There's energy imbalance markets, which are out-of-state and in-state, balancing energy on a 5-minute, sub-5-minute basis. There's a lot of talk about regionalization of the markets, taking the California energy markets and applying those to the whole Western United States. And that would have happened last year, although there got to be a big dispute over how are you going to run an aggregated market and govern it. You got California, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana. They don't want California choosing all the board of governors, and California doesn't want all the other states to control the market either. So you get into this political issue. That's the only reason why it hasn't been regionalized so far. We look at it as potential cost increases. Yeah, we got to be really careful on how it's done, because it can increase the cost of delivering electricity and gas, to our customers. And then there's a whole integration of renewable resources. And a lot of people have heard about the duck curve, but that's just the net. It comes from the fact that during the day, thousands of megawatts of solar come online. And so you don't have to run gas-fired generators and other generators during the day. And then it gets dark. All of a sudden, you have to bring on a lot of generation, and especially in months like March. I mean, you got to bring on, in California, you got to bring on 13, 14, 15,000 megawatts in a matter of an hour or two, about 30-year load, really fast, because as it gets dark, the solar drops off. Those are integration issues that the electric industry has to learn to deal with. So what are some of the changes in the industry? You know, we're going from one-way delivery from us to the customer, and we're becoming more management of grid services. So some of our customers will receive all or part of their energy, you know, from us. They got solar on their roof, you know, whatever. Customers may be self-generating, you know, part of that, and they may generate it during the day and when the solar's on, but they still want power at night. You know, so you got, you know, this changing, you know, marketplace there. Utility battery customer and utility battery storage is coming, you know, online. That can change that dynamic too, if they can store their own energy, you know, through the day. The other thing this is doing is it's changing the cost of energy every hour in the day. It used to be that the highest priced energy was right in the middle of the afternoon. Right now, it's not true. It's one of the lower costs because of all the solar that's out there. So the industry is really, you know, changing as we go forward. So some of our services are going to include, we'll still have to provide reliable power to a lot of our customers, but we may just be standing by for people. You know, they may be self-generating, you know, so our system may be, you know, in a standby mode. We may be taking the energy during the day, like with the solar customers, and giving it back to them, you know, at night. Some people may want, and it could be legislated on us and other things, access to other energy markets, you know, buying energy from others. And then maybe their solar panels can't start their air conditioner because of electrically the way they work. So we may be there just to provide the juice to let them start the compressor on their air conditioner. You know, there's a lot of different items out there. So what this impacts is the way our rates are structured and were developed. They were under the old paradigm where we're selling energy, you know, to the customers. In the future, we have to look at getting our future revenue needs less dependent on maybe that actual sale of that kilowatt hour of energy. So that's one thing that we want to be starting to talk to you about over the next few months is how are our rates structured and how might they be structured in the future, and then how do we get to that point over time. So that'll be an issue that we'll be coming back to you and talking to you about. Some of the other initiatives that we want to do as we go through this process is, one thing I want to do is start some more regular public outreach meetings where we can actually set up meetings, you know, with our residents and so on, and invite them over, and we will have a topic or two that we can present, but start a dialogue and get more input and discussion with you know, our customers on this as we go forward. And as part of that, as we go through, we really is, with the changing industry out there, we want to sit down and work through a strategic planning process and create a new you know, strategic plan as we go forward. And we'll include our customers and our staff, you know, council stakeholders here. Larry just went through with his staff a strategic planning process for his customer service team. We'll include, you know, that as an element, you know, and expand it. Integrated resource planning, you know, plan, and how are we going to acquire resources in the future? That'll be an element. Workforce element where we talk about succession planning, training programs, will be an element in there. Electric vehicle integration, you know, there's a lot of electric vehicles are changing out there. It's not just customer owned, But it's also public charging. We got also city fleet. As you bring on electric vehicles in the city fleet, it's becoming economical to do so, but we got to charge them. How are we going to, as a city, accommodate that? And what about staff that own electric vehicles? Making sure there's opportunities at all of our workforce sites, to do this. So there's a lot of work there. And then we need to look at our fiber and our Wi-Fi and some of our other technology offerings as part of this too, and part of this strategic planning process on what do we really want to be providing as we go forward. Another part we talked about was that infrastructure. We got to not only maintain our existing infrastructure and upgrade and replace to maintain reliability, but we have to serve the growing load there. So we need to have a infrastructure plan and expansion plan for our infrastructure as we're going forward. And then there's other programs that we can take a look at and want to consider, everything from community solar. Another option may be providing 100% green product to our residential customers. So these are all options of programs that we can look at going forward. So with that was a very high-level, quick, overview covering a lot of different areas. But I'd like to just open it up for any questions or discussions.
It's an exceptional report. Thank you so much. And there are some questions up here, if you don't mind. Councilmember Davis.
I don't have many questions, but this is great. I mean, this is the community engagement part. Very happy about that. That is something that I think we really need to get out there and talk to the people. And I know that you brought up for some of the regeneration. Do we know how many people in our city have solar panels or in that mode? Do you have any numbers?
We know exactly how many there are, but I just don't know it right now.
Oh, okay.
It's about 500.
About 500.
500 people, 500 residents, households?
Total with industry, it's about.
Okay.
And that's 16 megawatts and a 580 megawatt peak, just to give you a reference there.
Okay, but this is great. This is excellent. Well done. And I know that we're going to put Larry back into work again in the community, aren't we?
Right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you. Councilmember O'Neill.
Thank you, and thank you, Director Rockema, for the really complete report. And I mean, I think it shows that we have a lot of very intelligent people and gifted people who are looking out for our community at Silicon Valley Power. So I think a lot of what Director Rockema was getting at, one thing that that Councilmember Davis brought up, asked the number of people who are residents are using solar panels, and it's actually perhaps a lot smaller number than people would think in Santa Clara, because up until as we get to this point, it really hasn't been necessarily economically a good investment because of the low cost of power from the city of Santa Clara. So if you look at your payback and all that, it hasn't been perhaps as an imperative or a good investment as in other cities. So, but as we go forward, as we have, as we potentially even move to adopt this 100% renewable goal, I mean, this is partially the effort behind the strategic planning process, and Councilmember Kolstad and I heard a lot of this a few weeks ago at the APPA conference, and I think I made the comment about how the whole tone, for me, the tone of the conference was so different even from 2 years ago, in terms of how we have to continue to think boldly and to look at how are we going to create different models for service delivery, and a model that's very flexible, that's going to adjust to a lot of these changes. I mean, we're going to have a very difficult time keeping up with this. I mean, I've shared stories, and I remember, in my previous life, talking about when the phrase Internet of Things came to be and all that, and some of the stuff that we were talking about. And I'm like, I don't think this is going to happen as fast as people were saying within our company. And then we were all shocked. Oh my God, it's happening faster than they even thought it was going to happen, this transformation. And just as with everything, as people could control their thermostat from 5,000 miles away, they want to control other things about how they receive their energy, how it's delivered, how, where it's coming from. So I just think that, when we go into some of the strategic planning and the community engagement, people want to be a part of that somewhat. And it is certainly a fascinating area. But we are going to have our challenges to be able to keep up with what the state is probably going to be mandating very shortly. And, and particularly the challenges if we still continue, I've heard some people get, kind of really, the people that are, of course you can't include hydro as carbon free. What are you talking about? You can't include that. And, and so when being at the conference and talking with people who are from Oregon and Washington, where 100% of their energy is coming from hydro, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, you mean, if none of that's going to be considered carbon free, I mean, they have even a bigger challenge than we do. So I think it's something that I hope the community will continue to be engaged with, and I look forward to having that strategic planning process. I know it's going to be driven by our professionals at SVP, but I know that there will be some opportunities there for the community and our commercial and industrial customers, of course, to participate. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Councilmember Watanabe.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, John. That was a great presentation. I'm always fascinated by all these details that you give us. One thing I just want to throw out, kudos to Silicon Valley Power. I know there was a power outage over the weekend, and I think 2,700 people were without power. And I think what's wonderful is just how quickly Silicon Valley Power is out there on Twitter, with the information, and people can just go there and, just constantly through the night, just give updates so people know what the status is. I mean, that's a wonderful benefit, that that the power company offers to the community. For the amount of customers, 54,000 customers, is that residential as well as industrial?
Right, about 48,000 of those customers are residential. And then in 54, about 1,600 of those are what we would consider industrial customers.
Okay. And then with all of the changing in technology and renewable energy and green power, is it foreseeable that energy costs would eventually come down, or just because of how it's changing?
Well, yeah, the industry is changing a lot. The cost of solar has come down tremendously.
Yeah.
5 years ago, we were doing projects that probably cost, solar projects that were costing 25 cents, 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Now we're seeing projects that cost, 3.5, 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So the price of these renewables are coming down. Now the question is, can we integrate them into the system and provide the reliable energy? Because you still have to have the other types of resources, there and associated. And then we're seeing other costs go up, like transmission costs have gone up 6 times over that, same period. So some of the costs are changing. So it could come down. It's just all a matter of how this all balances out.
Exactly. I was just going to say it'll all just balance itself out. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you. I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Some are short answers, some might be a little bit longer. When you talk about no rate increases, are you talking about for residential customers, business customers, or one or the other, or both?
All of our customers.
All customers.
Yeah.
Okay.
When we, yes, we've traditionally and have applied our rate increases across the board. So if the rates go up for residents, they go up for the industrial customers the same amount.
The next question I had was, what kind of impact are the data centers having on SVP, since we have a fair amount of them?
Yes,
in our
absolutely.
city?
And out of that industrial load, probably 2/3 of it is right now, data centers out there. If anybody wants, and they do in Silicon Valley, people want to be close to their servers and close to their data, and there's speed and latency issues, and data transfers. They want to be here. If you want to have a server or a data center in Silicon Valley, you're going to pick Santa Clara, and because our prices are lower than anywhere else in Silicon Valley. So that drives a large part of our market there, and it just continues to grow. Part of it is we got people, waiting in line wanting to bring in and redevelop more and more areas into data centers, and that's where we're getting pushed close to that limit of, can we actually in this area in Santa Clara, can we continue to add and add and add, there. So we still have some room, to grow there, but that'll be part of our planning process to take a look at that and how we accommodate those, because the need for data is just, with all these Internet of Things and everything else going, it just seems to be climbing tremendously.
So according to your slide, John, it said about 3% of the users constitute about 90% of our sales.
Right.
Where are we with our debt right now with Silicon Valley Power?
Our debt, we have debt in two different areas. Part of it is the city's debt. And so we probably have, and I did not look these numbers up before I came.
No, just approximately.
Yeah, we're probably under $200 million, in debt. We have I can tell you our debt service is about $18 million a year.
Annually?
Annually.
Okay.
There. We also have, that's with city debt, SVP debt. We also, through our joint action agencies and their projects where we've shared with those, we have our share of that joint action agency debt, which is probably another $450 million.
That's our portion of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
All right, well.
And I can look those numbers up.
It's come down considerably.
It has been. At one point in time, we were pushing $1 billion.
$1 billion, I remember in the 90s, in the early 2000s, it was about $1 billion, so good job.
Yeah.
One other thing you talked about was the school districts. Are you talking about Santa Clara Unified only, or do you engage at all with Cupertino Union School District? Can we grab any of that business since they have a couple schools in Santa Clara?
We haven't, but it's something we can talk to. Is we're able to do the Santa Clara Unified because they had a big need, and they were, and it actually fit our profile and so on. But we can talk to Cupertino, yeah.
I was curious how we go across the borders, and I know we do that at I'll always call it Valley Fair at Westfield Mall. We can reach into San Jose and provide some service there. Is that true for school districts like Cupertino if we have a couple of their facilities here?
Yeah, we have to be a little bit careful going across lines to serve electricity.
So we can't hook up Apple?
Yeah, we
into
can't.
Santa Clara?
To the extent that there's a law out there that's really never been tested much that basically says that if we serve a retail customer of another utility, then we have to allow that utility to serve our retail customers. So we don't want to trigger that. But on the other hand, there are other areas like the Coleman Highline project, on Coleman there, where we served that entire complex before that law was in place, when it was FMC and so on there. So they're not a PG&E retail customer. So we will continue to serve those, but we'll serve them from a location in Santa Clara. The service point will be in Santa Clara, and then they'll take the energy over to the other buildings that are built out there.
Okay, my last question is, there was a few of us that attended a League of California Cities conference in Monterey, which I'll talk about later in the meeting. But one of the keynote speakers was a seismologist from Southern California, and she talked about when the big one comes and earthquakes and what's going on and how developing and how cities are built on. We're a system of systems in the city, and she talked about the communication disruption, that if there's a large earthquake, electricity could be out for weeks, and that we don't really have any experience in a modern economy for earthquakes that cause that type of disruption. So my question to you is, what are we doing to look at the big earthquake and how it may affect us here in Santa Clara, and in terms of disruption of service when the systems fail?
I think that is an excellent question and so on. And obviously,
not a short answer, but
not a short answer, absolutely. As we design and build things, we always try to build them to as best we can to withstand earthquakes and so on. One of the interesting pieces of that is the Loma Prieta, because we had a fair amount of movement here. And we had a large number of outages, about 14 or 15 locations in the city. But every one of them turned out to be the overhead lines in people's backyards, and the lines in backyards where the poles shake and they wrap the lines together, and they tend to burn down. It just took us a day to find them all, and then it took us another day, to put them all back up and get them in place. So we had outages going to 48 hours, which is really unusual to us. A lot of our system is underground, and that tends to be more flexible and so on. The other thing is our bigger stations and so on, we have the seismic designs, in place, and they actually withstood, that pretty well. Now, we did have one of the big communications disruptions with Loma Prieta, was the phone lines getting slammed by everybody wanting to call, home. And it turned out that we couldn't get a dial tone. Well, it turned out if you held the phone for a minute, you could. It was just that they were just so overwhelmed, that people, nobody's going to sit there holding a dead phone to their ear for a full minute waiting for a dial tone. So there's a lot of issues there. I think with the fiber optic systems, we have control of our internal, communications. That's an advantage, to us, in the city. You get radio, backups. It's a real question of,
Right.
I think it's a question we got to continue to work with.
She talked about the fact that we build buildings to life safety standards, but it's requiring, if we're looking at a big earthquake, which will, could affect like the water pipes, completely being severed and things like that for weeks.
Right.
And she said, can you imagine, not taking a shower for a month and having, I'm like, nah.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
But she said she did talk to us about putting extra money in construction above and beyond just the life safety standards to do that. And so I want to be forward thinking when we're looking at development in terms of all of our new development, going above and beyond to put in that extra protection for something that may happen in the future and to lead to less disruption for our residents.
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, seeing none. Rod, do you have any cards? Any member of the public, please come up. John, there might be some questions for you to answer. Thank you.
I'm sure there
Welcome.
will be. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Well, first off, I'm pleased to see that we've gotten rid of water bottles on the council dais. There was a...
we had it last time. This is not the first time.
Yeah, I missed the last meeting, so I was out of town. There was a very dire article in New York Magazine about climate change and how it's going to affect teenagers that are already born severely. So I want to, with that context, have you thinking about moving to 100% renewable energy. The cities around us, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto, and San Jose with their community choice aggregation, they have options that are carbon-free with large hydro and carbon-free without large hydro. And it's an opt-out system, and only about 1% of the people opt out. So that means 99% of their customers will now have carbon-free electricity. So I commend Silicon Valley Power for always being ahead of other utilities in terms of being greener, but now it seems like we're falling well behind the cities around us. So fuel cells are a very bad idea. They're no more efficient than combined cycle power plants, and they use methane. Methane suffers from leakage issues and all kinds of other problems. The global warming potential short term for methane is 80 times that of CO2. So Foothill College is looking at putting in a fuel cell thing. A bunch of organizations are opposing that. I'm disappointed to see that the city and SVP are supporting the governor's proposal, AB 378, to replace cap and trade. Senator Bob Wykowski has a much better proposal that's more like a carbon tax with dividends. That's SB 775. And I'm pleased to see that SVP is looking at a community outreach for getting community input. I've been advocating for some time for a utility advisory committee, just like Palo Alto has. The last question I have is that Director Rockama said that the pension liability is an issue, and I'm wondering if SVP is an enterprise, shouldn't they have their own contributions to pensions that would not affect the general budget? I know that we're looking at very substantial increases to our pension contributions in the next few years, and with a rate increase not in 2018, how is SVP planning to cover their pension liability? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak before John answers that, so we can get the questions down? Please come forward.
Sure.
Welcome.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for that presentation. That was wonderful, super informative. My first comment would be that it would be great to see this presentation on Silicon Valley Power's website, slide deck. Silicon Valley Power has a really good one page on their website that has a lot of facts and figures that answered a lot of questions I had. This goes a lot farther and answers a lot more of my questions. I'd love to see something like this posted there. Also, thanks to, I'm really looking forward to seeing this Silicon Valley Power strategic plan develop, and if there's opportunity for community input, I certainly would like to be a part of that. Thanks to Council definitely for continuing to support transition to solar via the residential rebates. I had an opportunity to participate in that earlier this year, and it was very smooth, and I think it's a great program. I know SVP is rare in California for still having residential rebates, and I think that it's a good way for us to go. I think Santa Clara has a real unique opportunity, given that we have SVP as a municipal utility. We have a really rare opportunity to really be a leader in a couple areas, whether it's climate change or just the ongoing evolution of how we are going to use energy, as we learned about in the presentation. However, I think that skipping a rate increase is a little bit of a wasted opportunity. I think that I would prefer to see a rate increase that was either near or slightly below either the California average or the national average. I understand it's great that we have the ability to go without a rate increase, but I don't want to blow an opportunity to invest in our reserves and our capital improvements while still remaining competitive. And finally, my question is, if we have any opportunity, this is a question for John, if we have any opportunity for applying grid scale storage to either deal with that energy imbalance market you were mentioning, or for local resilience, whether that could be deployed here within the city or closer to our generation resources, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, John, would you like to tackle some of those questions? Thank you.
Sure. I got a few of them down here. First of all, I'll start with the grid scale storage. And this is something that we are looking at. And actually, we are required to actually take a look at storage and see its cost effectiveness. And so that we do that, we look at it. But we're looking at some of the opportunities here. And one opportunity as an example is, can we combine a grid scale storage with maybe a black starting one of our peaker units to help black start the Bay Area, is one thing the ISO is looking for. So we're looking at opportunities like that. We don't have one yet, but we're exploring the possibilities. We're talking to the vendors. We're looking at those types of things. As far as the strategic, plan and process, we do plan to make sure that we open that up and get, customer and citizen, input. So we welcome, that participation, and we'll, as we move forward, we'll put together, a process so that we can solicit and people can participate in that process. 100% renewables is a very interesting, concept. A lot of utilities, 100% renewables means there's one municipal utility that averages over a year. What that means is they're using a lot of other types of energies in parts of the year, and then they have more renewables coming in at different times. Now, is that 100% renewable, or not? And I think we got to look at and make sure that as we're moving forward, that we're very honest and forthright, in our counting process, and we're not just buying renewable energy, credits and so on as we move forward. So I think there's a lot of good discussions that need to be had when we talk about, these alternatives. What do some of these terms, mean? And that can be done on a small scale in many areas, but we really need to take a look at and have those discussions. And I think it's a very, very good point. We want to be competitive, not just in price, but also in offerings and so on there too. Pension liability, we are part of the city's, pension, system. So, we're part of the bigger pot. However, the liability associated with our salaries in the utility, is covered by the utility, and the rates there. And so our liability is segregated, out, and that's where we're tracking, there. And as far as, skipping a rate increase, that's a very good, point. I mean, that's always a judgment call, and that's ultimately up to the city council. What we're telling you is that we don't, see the need for that rate increase to meet and exceed our targets over the next few years, is that's what our models are telling us. When that changes, we'll come back in, and as we put again our strategic plan together, all of these issues should come out and be discussed, and we'll put together a strategy that addresses all these questions as we go forward here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for answering all the questions. We appreciate it, and thank you very much to the public for attending this. City Manager, anything before we go into closed session?
I also just wanted to echo your comments. I wanted to congratulate and thank John and his team, Larry, Kevin, and Ann, and 100+ people behind the scenes who are working every day. And I've seen each one of them now in action, on the floor, trading power. And during storms, we saw how quickly they fix the areas where we lost power. So it's a very well-run operation, very complicated, a lot of facilities and equipment, but these guys are just on top of it, and very talented group. So
If
thank
I
you,
want to
John.
know something, I go to Twitter and I will read those tweets when the power's out, when it's come back on, what the problem was. It's really simple. It's easier than calling. Just watch it. Thank you very much. Is that you, Larry? I don't know who's out there tweeting, but tell them thank you very much, because a lot of people I notice are really thanking our electric utility, not only for the great service, but for the responsiveness and the communication. And I think that's what's really important, and you do a really good job at it. So thank you very much. Okay, next we have a closed session.
Madam Mayor?
Oh, yes.
I'm going to request that we continue all of the items on the closed session agenda.
Okay.
All the items were pretty much placeholders, and
Right,
there's,
I know
there's
that.
nothing new on any of them, so I don't think
Okay.
there's any need to meet on them.
Oh, excellent. No closed session then. We will reconvene back here at 7 p.m. for our regular meeting. Thank you.